Hi, welcome back to my channel. In this video, I am going to teach you how to knit the Brioche Ribbed hat. I designed this hat to be the perfect everyday hat that is fun to make and very stylish to wear as well. As you can see, it is knit using two-color brioche stitch, and the fold-over cuff showcases the opposite side of the brioche colors. It's very stylish, very fun, and I really like the way it turns out. I would recommend using a wool for this hat because brioche stitch is very stretchy, so wool kind of has a little bit of memory and it will hold its shape a bit more. The sample on the right, the pink version, I made using Originally Lovely Crea yarn, which is 100% baby alpaca. And baby alpaca is a little bit more silky and has more drape, so it doesn't quite bounce back as well or have as much elasticity as the merino wool. The hat on the left is knit using Originally Lovely Pura yarn, which is 100% merino wool. So it has that really nice elasticity and bounce back to just keep a nice fit and not overstretch or become too relaxed. So as you can see, the cuff is folded up and the reverse side of brioche is showing. So you have the two main colors and the reverse of those colors is shown on the cuff for kind of a unique feature and just a nice design feature. The decreases at the top are tapered inwards in a really nice way that are also a really nice design feature, and then they are joined at the very top using a 3-needle bind off. I experimented with quite a few different ways to get the top joined to be just how I wanted it, and I liked the look of the 3-needle bind off the best. As you can see on the red sample, I did work the 3-needle bind off a little bit too tight, but on the pink sample, you can see that I did it looser and it looks like a more seamless join. So I definitely recommend working your 3-needle bind off a little bit looser, and I will walk you through this as we get to it. This hat is not reversible, even though it seems like it could be. Because of the 3-needle bind off, you have a little bit of a seam on the inside, and the way that brioche decreases are worked, they don't look quite as nice. So as I mentioned before, the yarn that I'm using is Originally Lovely Pura. This is a DK weight 100% non-superwash merino wool yarn. It's super luxurious, not itchy at all. So if you've never tried wool before, this is not your itchy, like, coarse wool. This is a very nice, luxurious, soft wool. You will need two colors to use, so a main color and an accent color. I'm using the white as the main color and the red as an accent color. You will then need a size 6, 16-inch circular knitting needle for the main hat, and then a size 8 knitting needle for the cast-on edge. The reason we're using a size 8 needle for the cast-on edge is because we're working a tubular cast-on. So this, using a bigger needle than what we're using for the body of the hat, makes sure that this cast-on edge doesn't get too tight and that it's nice and stretchy. Brioche stitch is a very stretchy stitch, so you can't use just a regular cast-on edge. It won't look nice. You can see that I used the cast-on edge. I worked the cast-on edge in the accent color, which is the red for the sample, and I think that it makes kind of like a nice barrier between the two colors and shows off the accent of the fold-over. So tubular cast-on is almost like a long tail cast-on. You need to leave a long tail because you're working with two strands of the yarn with the cast-on edge. So to begin, you'll make a slip knot and put that slip knot on your size 8 needle. I'm showing this in the white color because it's a little bit easier to see on camera and I want you to see all the details. So grab the yarn with your two hands and separate it between your thumb and your pointer finger, and then hold the tails in the rest of your hand. So the first stitch, the slip knot, is actually a knit stitch because it's like a knit 1, purl 1 rib stitch. So the first one we're actually casting on will be a purl. So how we create this is we're going to put that needle over and under the back strand, over and under the front strand, and then underneath both of the strands. So as you can see, that leaves a little bit of a bump, and that is our purl stitch. So now the knit, we go over and under the front strand, over and under the back strand, under both of them. And there you can see there is no bump on this stitch, so that is our knit. We'll continue just like that and you will want to cast on the correct stitches for your given size just straight on this needle. So continuing forward, we're going to go over the back strand, over the front strand, underneath both of them. So catch the front strand, back strand, and then both of them. Continuing across just in this way. Tubular cast on is kind of hard to count the stitches once they are on the needle. So I would definitely count as you work, because it might be confusing if it gets twisted around at all exactly how many stitches you have. So if you're just careful and count the correct amount, you will know how many you have and it'll be a little less difficult. As you can see there, it can be a little bit tricky to see, but it's not impossible. You can definitely count them. I keep them tight together just because when it does get off of the needle and onto the strand, that's when they kind of twist and get confusing. But it's just this first row that is a little bit tricky to see. So I am going to speed up here. Again, cast on the amount for your hat size. Coming up to the end, I've cast on 72 stitches here. And you can see they're all bunched together pretty tightly. Like I said, I just keep them bunched together. I think it's easier. So now we're going to hold that stitch with our thumb, just pinch it like that, and turn our needle over. So some people twist it an extra time here. I think that adds a little bit of bulk, so I don't twist it extra, but it does make that first stitch a little bit loose. So you kind of have to trust the process and just keep going forward. So also, I want to note, make sure that you're holding the strand that's connected to the ball of the yarn, not your tail. I've definitely started working with the tail before, and obviously that's not correct, and it's always a little bit frustrating because it's hard to take off. So make sure that you have the strand connected to the ball, and then take your needle. So still your size 8 needle. We're working the first couple rows. It's tubular cast on edge has like 3 rows essentially, 3 steps to complete this cast on edge. So now this is the second step. We're going to knit through the back loop only across the knit stitches of this row. So knit through the back loop and then move the working yarn to the front of your needle, and you're going to slip that purl stitch purlwise. Move your working yarn to the back and knit that next stitch through the back loop. Once again, move that yarn to the front, slip that next stitch purlwise, and move the yarn to the back and knit that stitch through the back loop. You're knitting them through the back loop because they're kind of twisted. You only do this on step 2, so the second row of the cast on edge. The next row you don't need to work through the back loop, but just this very first one. So you can kind of see as you go here. I'm going to switch and work continental for a little bit. It gets a little bit more obvious as you have more stitches. So slip that stitch purlwise, working yarn in front, knit that stitch through the back loop. It's always a little bit tricky, but like I said, you have to trust the process with this cast on edge, and it really will look good. It's a little bit more finicky, but it really is worth it. It's the little details that I think really make your knitting look professional and just super nice and satisfying. So you can see a little bit here. It's more obvious which stitches are the knit stitches and which stitches are the purl stitches as we've worked a little bit more. You can see the V of the knit stitch and then the bump of the purl stitch. So you can see we're already setting up for our brioche stitching. I'm going to zoom ahead a little bit here. This is a good time to pause and work across this row if you're working alongside the video. Just continue, slip one working yarn in front, and then knit one through the back loop. That final stitch you'll see is a purl. Just leave the strand in front, and then when you turn your needle over, that strand will just cross over that stitch because the next one will be a knit. It was a purl on the last side, so now it's a knit on this one. So you can see here, I'm going to focus in on it, that as I mentioned, the rib stitch is forming a little bit more, and you can see how it wraps under that needle. So knit that first one, just regular knit now, not through the back loop, and then slip one, working yarn in front. Slip the purl stitch, working yarn in front. Knit one, regular knit one, slip one, working yarn in front. Knit one, slip one, working yarn in front. You'll work this all the way across this row. So this is the final row of our cast on edge. Like I said, it's 3 steps, like 3 rows essentially, to complete the tubular cast on. This is how the tubular cast on method has always worked. There are some modifications depending on the ribbing, but it's a great cast on method and I love using this method. It's a little bit more tedious, but I think that just those extra steps really make it look nice. So zooming ahead a little bit here, this is a good place to pause if you want to catch up when you're done with this row. You can see here how it's starting to form even more. You can see the knit stitch just really, it looks like it wraps under to the back side and the front side, like it just is totally seamless between the 2 sides. So continuing across again, coming to the end, I have knit one, slip one, working yarn in front, the final couple stitches, and then like I said, that final stitch, you just slip it with the yarn in front and leave that yarn in front. So now we're going to begin working using our size 6 needle, which is for the actual hat, and we're going to start working brioche. So you can see our tubular cast on edge here. You can see the V's of the knit and how they just roll over that edge. It does stretch out a little bit and then it doesn't look like quite as thick. And as I mentioned, now we will begin working brioche. So you need your accent color. And what we're going to do is slide this tubular cast on edge to the other end of the needle. So we're going to begin working in our second color, our main color now. So I'm going to be using red, but on the sample I showed you at the beginning, the main color is white. So this is not the color that will be shown on the fold over. You can see here we have our knit stitches and our rib stitches, and we're going to follow along with these to set up the brioche stitch. The first row isn't really like true brioche, but we're going to use it to set up. After this row we will be working true brioche, and I'll explain that more as we get further along. So as I mentioned before, I'm showing you the cast on edge in white just so that it's easier to see, and now we're going to begin working in red. If you want the sample to look like mine, this would be the cast on edge in white, and then the main, or cast on edge in red, and then the main color would be in white. So the example I'm showing you now is just the reverse. So take that accent strand and your size 6 needle, you're going to be working off of the size 8 onto the size 6. I like to hold the tail of the yarn in my left hand as I start to work. So just knit that first stitch regular. You don't have to do anything special, not through the back loop or anything. It's just a regular knit. And then you're going to slide that off and move that yarn, the working yarn, to the front now, between the 2 needles, to the front. And now you slip that purl stitch, the next stitch purlwise, and you don't move that strand to the back. You leave it where it is and you knit the next stitch. So that strand just goes over that stitch that you slipped and pairs it together. So it's like a yarn over around the stitch. So you have a knit one and then a paired stitch, a yarn over wrapped around that purl, and then another knit one. So move the working yarn to the front once more, slip that purl stitch purlwise, keep that working yarn in front and knit that next stitch so that the yarn wraps around the purl. Super easy. It's just these 2 stitches across, and this is really how easy brioche is. So slip that next one and knit the next one without moving the yarn. You can see it a little more now. You have one, and then the 2 paired stitches, that is 1 stitch. So you have your single stitch and then your double stitch, a paired stitch. Some people will count this as 2 stitches, but I think that that's really confusing. It's just 1 stitch. You'll never work those as 2 stitches. So again, just knit 1, slip 1 working yarn in front, knit 1, wrapping that yarn over. Super simple. So like I said, brioche is kind of intimidating, but it's not as hard as it looks at all. It's really just, when you're working it in the round with 2 colors, it's just 2 rows. One of them, one color you will use for the brioche purl rows, and one color you will use for the brioche knit rows. The brioche knit rows will be your main color. So like I said, the red and white sample that I showed you is white is the main color. So skipping ahead here, getting to the end of the round, just repeating as I've shown you up until this point, and then we are going to join in the round here. So that final one, you have to make sure that red strand, it is still paired with that final stitch, because that is a purl stitch, so it needs that yarn over wrapped with it. And I'm going to note this as we get to the end of this next round and show you what I mean with that as well. You can kind of just tighten up those strands a little bit. They get loose at the end, at the beginning, and just kind of straighten it out so there's no twists in your needle. And you are going to join now. You're going to begin working on using this single circular needle, the circular needles, as for your entire piece. No more size 8 needle. So join without twisting. Make sure there's no twists in your work. And then you can kind of, it always is a little confusing here. Just make sure you're not knitting with your tail at all. You just want to always make sure you're working with the strand of yarn that's connected to the ball of yarn. So since we worked with our red on the last one, now we need to use white. You can tell that we have more strands of red, so now we need white, and then we'll make more strands of white. Put your stitch marker on your needle to mark your beginning and end of the round. It's just easier this way. You never have to think about it, and then you can always make sure that you're getting that final paired stitch. So again, a little bit of organization. Just make sure you don't get those strands all tangled. It's always a little bit tricky to get started, but once you get going, it's quite a bit easier. Don't worry. Tighten up those strands if you need. And then we are going to begin working, and just this strand going across is what's going to join in the round. There's no special tip to join in the round. It's just you begin joining in the round and it joins your work. And there is like a tiny gap later when you weave in the ends. You can just close up that gap. It's super simple, and it's really not even as big of a gap as you would think. So with that white strand, we're now going to work a brioche purl row. So that first strand there is it's a knit. So since we're doing a brioche purl, we need to work our yarn over with that knit stitch. So working yarn in front, slip that stitch purlwise, and then we're going to yarn over around that stitch to pair with it. So just like that, you can see that there is a yarn over paired with that stitch. It's a little bit different than the last row because you actually have to wrap it, and that is our paired stitch. So the next one, our yarn's back in the front, and now we're going to purl that paired stitch we worked on the previous yarn, both strands together. Slip the next stitch, yarn over around and over that stitch, and then purl that paired stitch together. So purling the two, you could say purling two together, that's like our paired stitch. Again, make sure you don't have a twist, by the way. But purling those 2 strands together, that's what a brioche purl is. So people will say brioche purl, or BRP is the abbreviation. So people say brioche purl is burp, and brioche knit, BRK, is bark, burp, and bark. If you ever hear that, that's what that means. So slip the next one, purlwise, yarn over, wrap it around, and then purl that paired stitch. When you just have one single stitch, you wrap it around, and then the two that are paired together, you will purl together. Continuing across this way. So the row, like I said before, the row that you're working the brioche purl on will be the color, or the color you're working the brioche purl on will be the color that shows more prominently on the cuff, but the main color will be the color you're using the brioche knit in. So continuing along here, you can't really see the brioche stitch starting to develop yet, but you can definitely see the tubular cast on a little bit better. It definitely won't look that thick as you go across. It kind of like stretches out and evens, but you will be able to see the brioche here closer. We're just finishing the second round of the brioche. So remember how I said that final stitch, you have to make sure it's paired. Here it is still paired, but sometimes that strand gets like moved away because it's the last one. So just always make sure you get that final brioche purl stitch. This is really important just to maintain that brioche pattern, or otherwise it'll look weird there. So when you're finished, that final one is a brioche purl, so you don't have to worry about the paired over with it on the next row. So slip that marker, and now we're just going to begin working with the red strand that we had left aside on the last row. And we're going to work another brioche knit round. So the first one was like a setup brioche knit round. This is our first official brioche knit round. You can see a little bit here, we have more white strands than red. So then you know that we have to work a red row. And you can also see that our paired stitch is a knit stitch and our single stitch is a purl stitch. So we know that we have to work a brioche knit row because we're working the paired stitches. If you get lost, that's kind of an easy way to tell. So beginning with that red strand, we're going to brioche knit that first stitch. So knit those two strands together, move the working yarn to the front, slip that purl stitch, and then brioche knit the next stitch so that the strand wraps over around that purl that we slipped and creates a paired stitch. So brioche knit, move the working yarn to the front, and you can see there that strand kind of overlapped that one. If that happens, don't get discouraged or anything, just kind of separate them apart and then you'll be able to see what's actually going on. So as I said, slip that one, brioche knit, slip one, working yarn in front, don't move working yarn to the back, brioche knit, and continue around this way. Super easy. And this is how every brioche knit row will be. It'll work the same way. All brioche knit rows will be in your main color. All brioche purl rows will be in your accent color. So for brioche stitch in the round, it's just a 2-row repeat. When you're working brioche stitch flat, it's actually kind of like a 4-row repeat. All right, doing a little bit of a close-up here. You can see it's starting to form. You can actually see that very first red brioche stitch. So continuing around, working up to the end here. Remember, we have to slip that final stitch and make sure we leave a yarn over with that stitch. So the yarn will just be kind of hanging out there. You just have to make sure you get it then on the next row. So now we have our brioche knit row completed, and we're going to move on with the brioche purl. So now we're working in our accent color strand. So for what I'm showing you here, this is our white strand of yarn. Make sure you're using the tail that's connected to the ball of yarn, the strand connected to the ball, like I mentioned before. So that first one, we have to move, we're pairing, this is a knit stitch, the first one, so we have to pair that knit stitch with a yarn over. So move the working yarn to the front, slip that first knit stitch, and then yarn over around and over that stitch, and then brioche purl. Our strand is already to the front, so we don't have to put it to the front this time. Slip that next stitch and yarn over around, brioche purl, and then create a paired stitch again. Make sure you get it around there over the stitch. You don't want it to go through your needles. So you'll continue in this way all the way across. And like I said, these are just the 2 repeats for your brioche stitch. You have a brioche knit row and a brioche purl row, and that's really it. It's super easy until you get to the crown decreases. It's still pretty easy there. There's a few additional things to keep in mind, which I'll show you. I'll lead you through every step, but it's just these 2 rows. You can really see brioche stitch starting to form here. We have a couple rows, and it just looks really nice. The 2 colors kind of, there's like a pearl version, but the pearl looks different than a normal pearl. And then the knit, you can see it has that regular knit ribbed look. So on the sample, the finished sample, you can see I am, just keep in mind I'm working the reverse so that I could show you the cast on edge. But like I said, it's just those 2 rows. It's just a brioche knit and a brioche purl row repeated. So this is a good place. Pause here, work your rounds, and I'm going to show you coming up here how to work the crown decreases. So I switched over to the regular colors. So now my brioche knits are on in white and my brioche pearls are in red. Just so you know, I'm working the reverse now. It's a little bit confusing, but this will showcase the decreases better. So that final pearl, you just have to make sure that you still get that paired yarn over with it. And then you're going to slip that main, or that stitch marker that marks the end of the round. Careful not to wrap those strands around each other, anything, just keep them straight. You don't want anything to get twisted. And slip that marker and then work your brioche knit. You can tighten up that last purl stitch a little bit if you want. So it's just those 2 rounds until your hat measures 10 total inches, and then you will begin working the decreases to shape the crown of the hat. So I have 10 inches here, and I'm going to show you how to shape the top of the hat to taper it inwards and kind of get those nice ribbing decreases that are kind of a good design element. So you want more stitch markers at this point. I use 4, and then you want one that's different to mark the beginning and end of each round. So what you're going to do, this will be different depending on the size that you are making, but for my specific size that I'm making here, I am going to do brioche knit yarn over 7 times. So 14 total stitches. And then I'm going to work a right leaning brioche decrease, which is a brioche knit 3 together, which isn't really the best way to describe it because there's a few additional steps of this. It's not necessarily just a brioche knit 3 together, but I will show you that here. So make sure you have 14 stitches, and then we'll work our decrease right here. So it'll be done over those 3 stitches because you want to decrease 2 stitches to maintain the brioche pattern. So that first stitch, it's a brioche knit, slip that stitch and the paired stitch knitwise. That purled stitch, just 1 strand, knit that stitch. And now slip that stitch that you slipped before over the stitch you just knit. Now you slip that stitch back over to the left needle and slip the next brioche knit stitch over the stitch you just slipped. So as you can see here, we've decreased 2 stitches, and it's basically like 2 brioche knits stacked on top of each other. And this will maintain your brioche rib pattern, the like knit 1, purl 1 essentially, and create that little rib look. So now to mark it for the next round, we are going to place a marker on your needle here. We will just mark that the 3 stitches between the decreases so that on the previous rounds we don't have to do counting. You know, you just work up until either 3 before the marker or up until the marker, depending on which way you're decreasing. So slip that next stitch and work the yarn over, brioche knit 1, and slip the next stitch. So it's 3 stitches in between the 2 decreases. So place another marker on our needle, and now we're going to work a left-leaning brioche decrease. So this one's a little bit different. The technical name for this is a brioche knit slip slip knit, which again isn't a very good name. So it'll be a left-leaning one this time. We want them stacked differently than they were on the last one. So again, slip that first stitch knitwise, the knit and its paired stitch, both of them, and then knit the next 2 stitches together. The brioche knit, the purl, and the paired stitch. So it's 3 strands. Knit all 3 of those together. It's always a little bit tight, but you just want to make sure you don't split your yarn or anything. And then take that stitch you slipped and pass it over the stitch you just knit. So it's a little bit easier than the brioche, the right-leaning brioche decrease. But you can see there's one that's leaning right, and then the one we just worked leaning left. And the markers are marking the 3 stitches between the 2 decreases. So now we need to work across to the next ribbing portion where we will work the decreases again. Depending on your size, this will be a different amount of stitches that you work between these 2 ribbed decrease areas. So for my size, I'm working first a yarn over, and then I'm working a brioche knit yarn over 13 times. So 27 total stitches after the left leaning brioche decrease until I start the decreases again on the opposite side. So continue across. Definitely double check this part because it's pretty important just to keep your decreases evenly spaced so they meet up perfectly in the middle. Because we are working or decreasing 2 stitches per decrease, so we're decreasing 8 stitches total per round. We're going to work, so after the decrease round, we do a brioche purl round, and then we do a brioche knit round even, and then another brioche purl round. So they're every other brioche knit round, whereas generally you decrease every other row, so every knit row in brioche stitch. Because of how we're decreasing, you're decreasing every 4th row. So like every other brioche knit row, if that makes sense. So I'm just double checking to make sure I have the right stitch count because, like I said, this spot is pretty important just to make sure that they line up perfectly at the end. And I am to the spot where I'm going to work my next brioche knit 3 together decrease. So once again, we're going to slip that stitch knitwise and knit that next stitch, slip that slip stitch over, pass the slip stitch over the stitch you just knit, slip that stitch back to your left needle, and then pass the next stitch over the stitch you just slipped over. So now they're stacked properly and you've just decreased 2 stitches. Once again, take a stitch marker and place it after that decrease, and then we're going to work yarn over, brioche knit 1, yarn over, slip 1 again. So 3 stitches total, and then you place your next marker. And now we have to work a left-leaning brioche decrease. So a brioche knit, slip, 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 knit. So slip that first stitch knitwise and its paired stitch, knit those next 2 together, so 3 strands total. It's always a little bit tight there. And then pass that slip stitch over the stitch you just worked. So now you can see you have a left-leaning brioche decrease and then a right-leaning brioche decrease on the other side of the ribbed section. Now we are going to continue across. It's actually pretty easy. So finish the round. The reason that we're working the beginning and end of round in the center of these decreases is because otherwise the decreases on either side of those rib stitches won't line up perfectly even. There'll be kind of like a jog between them, and I think that this looks quite a bit better. So work our brioche knit row round until the end of the round. Make sure to leave that strand over for the final, over the top for the final yarn over. Slip that marker, and now we work a brioche purl round even, so no decreases or anything, just a regular brioche purl round. And you're just going to work over those decrease stitches as though nothing happened differently than those stitches on the previous row. So move that yarn to the front, yarn over, slip that stitch, yarn over around, and then brioche purl. So I'm going to show you here now. We have our decreases on those two ends, and then like I said, that marker that denotes the beginning and end of each round is on the center of them. So now you will work a brioche purl round, a regular brioche knit, a regular brioche purl, and then you'll do another decrease round. So you'll decrease on every other brioche knit round. And I'll show you as well kind of how to tell if you've knit around or if you just decreased, because I know if you're starting out, it's always a little bit hard to tell how many rounds you worked, but I will show you that once we get to it. So continuing around, once you get to that brioche decrease, you'll just work a brioche purl, and then you'll work a yarn over with that stitch just as you would a normal stitch. You just continue working it regular in the round, and then you work those regular stitches. When you get to the markers, you'll just slip the marker, pretty simple, and then yarn over to pair that stitch. Make sure you get that yarn over on the right side of the stitch marker, the correct side, because otherwise it can just get a little bit confusing. You can fix it if it does get wrapped around the wrong side, but it just makes it a little bit easier and smoother so that you don't have to think about it too much. So finishing up this round, make sure you get that final yarn over on that stitch, slip that marker, and now we just continue a brioche knit round, and this is just a regular brioche knit round, no decreases, because we decreased on the last brioche knit round. So regular brioche knits up until that marker. I'm going to speed ahead just a little bit here because it's a little repetitive at this point. I'm sure you know how to brioche knit pretty well. Coming up to that spot where we decreased, you just work it like a regular stitch. Nothing different or special about it. Slip that marker and continue across, as easy as that. It does get a little bit faster because you have less and less stitches each row at this point. And you can keep using your circular needle for quite a while here. When you do need to switch over, I'm going to switch over and do magic loop, so I'll show you that as well. So our final brioche purl round to work evenly, and then we do the decreases once more. So now our brioche knit round, this is another decrease round. So like I said, I'm going to show you here. You can see our decreases. I'm going to find one here and focus in on it. So you can see that was our decrease row right there. And then the V right above it that's not connected to the needle means that we worked one brioche knit round after that decrease round. And then our next one will be another decrease round. So we're now to the point where we have to work another brioche decrease. So slip that first stitch knitwise, knit the next stitch, which is actually a brioche purl, and then pass the first slip stitch over that stitch you just knit. It's a little tight there, just make sure you pass both strands over. Slip it back to the left needle and then pass the next stitch over that stitch you just slipped over and slip it back to the right needle. And you have your right leaning brioche decrease. So now we work our yarn over slip stitch and brioche knit, yarn over slip stitch, slip that marker, and now we have a left leaning brioche decrease to work here. So again, a little bit different, but it is similar. So we'll slip that first brioche knit stitch, knit the next 2 together, so 3 strands total. It's always a little bit tight, so don't worry about that. And then pass both strands of that slip stitch over the stitch you just worked, just like that. So you can see another left-leaning decrease, and it looks like a just ridge going upwards. So now working to the end of the round. Of course, you'll do that on both sides of the ribs, and you can see here, you can see your brioche decreases might not look perfectly smooth right here, and that's actually fine. Don't worry about that at this point because you can fix it when you block your hat. What I do when I block it is you soak it in like lukewarm water, and then when it's wet, you can kind of adjust the stitches like this with your needle and just even them out so that they all lay flat. You can already tell right there that just that little bit of adjusting made it quite a bit better. And then when it dries, you either put it on a small balloon, smaller than your finished dimensions of your hat so it doesn't overstretch, or you can lay it flat, and then once it dries like this, holding that shape, it will stay just like that with your decreases looking evenly. So you can see that it's already quite a bit better. And now you will have to continue around again, finish your brioche knit round, then a brioche purl round, and then you'll repeat it even, and then another decrease. Once it starts to get pretty tight on your needles, you will need to switch to either double pointed needles or work magic loop method, and I'm actually going to work magic loop method. I like it a little bit better. I think it's just a little bit more simple. So I'm using a size 6 needle still, same size of needle, but it's a longer circular needle. So I think this is a 40-inch. You can use as small as a 32-inch for magic loop method, and basically you're separating it into 2 rows but still working it in the round. So I'm going to show you, this is like an expedited tutorial for magic loop. If this explanation is too confusing for you, you are probably going to want to watch a full version tutorial, but for the sake of time, I'm just going to do kind of a quick tutorial version of magic loop. So what you will do is start working on to your new needle. Make sure that yarn over is in the correct spot still. So we're working with a brioche knit row, and we're going to be working on to the new needle. So our long size 6 needle. This is not the size 8 needle you used for the cast on edge. This is a different circular needle. So we will just continue working. Instead of on to the other end of our circular needle, we're going to work onto a new circular needle, and we're just going to work across evenly. I would make sure you do this on a row that's not a decrease row, just so it's a little bit easier. If it's a decrease row, it's just kind of a lot to focus on, but you can really do what you would like. So I'm going to separate it in between the markers on either side so that I don't have to readjust at any point. So now right here, I'm going to separate my magic loop. This will be part of the first row. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull that strand through so that it's in the middle of the cord, kind of like not all the way to the opposite end, but kind of near on the cord, near that opposite end. And then I'm going to let that cord kind of just wrap around and have a loop on that side. And then I'm going to continue working still with my new needle and my old needle to kind of make another row. And I'm going to work these stitches until in between the stitch markers on the other end, marking the other decreases as well. And then I'm going to separate and finish the round to connect with the other side. So you want to make sure your yarn over is correct and that it doesn't get twisted around the needle in a way more than it should. You just want to maintain the position of everything. So continuing our brioche knit round across, I'm going to work until between those 2 markers again, just to maintain the position so that I don't have to readjust at a later point. continuing across. It's always a little bit awkward setting up magic loop, but it does get easier. Don't worry. You just have to, once again, trust the process. Work all of your yarn overs and knits just as you should, just as a normal round, even though you're setting up for magic loop. Slip that marker and keep that yarn over on the correct side. I realize I missed a yarn over looking back at this, but I was able to fix it on the next round, so don't miss a yarn over like that. Sometimes it's hard while filming. And now I'm going to readjust my needles again. So take that, the needle you just worked onto, your work onto, and you're going to pull it through. So you pull it off. Well, first turn it over. This is always the confusing part when explaining it to people. I'll show you here. So that needle that also, like the opposite end of your long needle, you'll kind of just like get that out of the way for now. And then your long needle that you just worked onto, you're going to pull, but not all the way. You want to leave a loop on the other side. So on my left hand underneath, you can see there's a loop there and then a loop on the right side. And then you will continue working your, we'll finish this round of magic loop of our old, still working off of our old needle to finish the setup of the magic loop round. I realize my camera is a little bit out of focus here, but you can still kind of see what I'm doing. Luckily, there isn't too much crazy stitch work here. So just to the final place of that round, the final stitch of the round, and we have one more. So we're actually switching to a brioche purl stitch here. I just didn't want that stitch marker to be on the very end and fall off. So work our first yarn over, and then this is where it gets interesting. Your short needle, you'll set aside now. You're totally done with it. We're done with that one. And you are going to finish working that part, that half of your magic loop with both of the needles of your longer magic loop needle now. So push through, push those stitches to the end of the left needle, and you will continue working across those rounds. So finish the row using the two needles of the long circular needle now. Just the last few stitches to the end of this row, and then you readjust once you get to, it's almost like two separate rows, and then you'll readjust to move your needles and have the loops on like repositioned. So now turn it over, and what you do is the strand, the stitches that are in the middle of the strand, you'll push that strand or pull it down so that those stitches are on the needle this time as well. So both stitches are on the needle to kind of create a big loop on the left side. And then that back needle you pull through just until you have enough to work with, but you still leave a loop on the left, and then you have a loop on the right. So those back stitches are actually just on the cord, not on a needle anymore. So make sure that you work that yarn over with that stitch on the back of the row that you just finished. And now we continue working across with our new row with our repositioned needles. So just continue across, slip or brioche purl, and then or like a regular brioche purl row, and then work across this row. I'm going to speed up a little bit here and then show you how to reposition again. So once you're to the end of that row, just turn it over, and then you have to reposition the needles. So slide that one down. So they're kind of wrapped around here. It's always a little bit more readjusting, but it's okay. I like this a lot better than double pointed needles, but if you do like double pointed needles, definitely go ahead and use those. So now you just slide that down until those stitches are on the needle, not on the cord, on the actual needle. And then you're going to, that back needle you pull through and leave a little bit of a loop on the left and a loop on the right. So now make sure you get that final yarn over just like that. And you don't want to pull this too tight because then it will make that really tight and hard to get on the needle next time. So just, you want to keep it kind of loose, just try and keep an even tension. The more you work it, the better you'll kind of get at that. So just continue across. Now this row, you have your loops on either side, and that's what calls it magic loop. You have your loops and your knitting is a loop, so it's pretty nice. It's pretty handy. So then we're to the end of the round. Our end of the round point is in the middle of the front row, but that's okay. So now we switch and work a brioche knit round. So switch the strands of yarn right there, just drop that red, start with the white to finish up that row. So if you do need a longer tutorial for magic loop, you definitely there's tons out there. This one's just kind of an expedited version. So now we're working another right leaning brioche decrease, a brioche knit 3 together. And pass those final stitches over once more, slipping it back to the right needle. And then finish up this row of stitches. Just like that. And now you can see your decreases there. It's getting pretty small now, so it definitely wouldn't fit on our small circular needle still. So turning it over, we have to readjust here, push the strands, push that needle so that the stitches are on that needle, not the cord. Like I said, they can be hard to get on if you pulled it too tight on the last round, but once you pull that through, you'll have a little bit more give if it did get tight. So now continue in this way until you have 16 stitches remaining. And once you have 16 stitches, you'll finish your brioche purl round and then work a brioche knit and a brioche purl round even. So this is we're to our next decrease round, and this is our final decrease round. We have 16 stitches, and at this point we're going to decrease 6 stitches. So we're going to have 10 stitches, and then we will work our bind off. This is a little bit different. Instead of decreasing 8 stitches this round, we're decreasing 4. So I'm finishing up the brioche purl round here before I show you how to work the decreases on the final round. So make sure you get that final yarn over with the final brioche purl, and then you will switch and work your final brioche knit round. So right here, it's a little bit different. We're not going to be decreasing 3 stitches. We're going to be, well, we are on this spot, but on the next decrease, we're only going to be decreasing 2. So work a regular brioche knit 3 together here, slip 1, knitwise, knit 1, pass the slip stitches over, slip it back to the left needle, and then pass the next 2 strands of the stitch over the stitch you just passed over, pass it back to the right needle. And then you slip that marker and yarn over, and then brioche knit. Now we have to readjust our needles again. Turn it over, readjust the magic loop, push that through, and now, like I said, this is our decrease. Our left leaning decrease is just a 2-stitch decrease, or a 1-stitch decrease worked over 2 stitches, not a double decrease worked over 3 stitches, if that makes sense. I'll show you here. So work that final slip stitch, slip that marker, and now here we work our single left leaning decrease over those 2 stitches. So what we're going to do here is we're going to slip those first 2 strands, slip that first stitch knitwise as we've done all along, knit that next single stitch, and then pass those 2 strands that you slipped over the stitch you just worked. Just like that. So you have decreased a single stitch, and it's 2 brioche knits right next to each other, which is actually okay because we're going to finish our hat with the 3 needle bind off after this. So now we have to work another right leaning double decrease. So slip 1 knitwise, knit 1, pass the slip stitches over, slip that stitch back to the left needle, and then pass those 2 strands over the stitch you just slipped back over, and then slip it back to the left needle, just like that. So we've decreased 2 stitches there and 1 stitch on the other side. Now we have to work until the next marker again and work our final decrease. So we're to the end of this row. Now we have to turn it over and adjust our needles again. So you can see there you do have 2 brioche knits right next to each other. Again, that's okay because we're going to work our 3 needle bind off after this. So this is just our final couple stitches of the hat. Adjust our stitches, our needles here, push that one through, and then pull the back needle forward. It's just a little bit of readjusting. It's always kind of awkward when there's only a couple stitches. But again, trust the process. So that final, even though it is our final row, you still have to do the yarn overs with the paired stitches with our slip stitches. So slip that marker, and then let's get that red strand out of the way. And then now we have to work a single decrease again. So slip that next stitch knitwise, and then knit 1, which is that purl stitch, and then pass those 2, the slip stitch over the stitch you just knit. And that's it. Now we have to readjust everything that yarn over got on the other side of that stitch marker. I talked about that earlier, but just you can scoot it over so it's on the right side. So now we're going to adjust our needles, like I said, and we're going to put the stitches from one side of that ribbed edge on one needle, and then the other side of that ribbed edge on the second needle. So if you turn it over, you want to split it. You'll pull it through like that and then split it so that it's 5 and 5. So you can kind of bend it like that. And then it's the point on the opposite end where there's the 2 brioche knits. You want to split those just like that and then pull your loop through and pull that through. So you'll see you have 5 stitches on one needle, the front needle, 5 stitches on the back needle. And we actually work the 3 needle bind off inside out. So this is just to show you the stitches and then show you how it lines up like that. And now we have to turn it inside out. So this is another reason I like working magic loop, because if you're doing double pointed needles, it is a little bit trickier to turn it inside out. You just have to kind of like scoot them really far to one end. You will remove the markers when you come across them at this point. So just keep that in mind. You can take off that beginning and end of the round marker right now. So what you're going to do is take those 2 needles and you're going to pull them so that your work is on the cord, and then that hole in the center, you're going to thread your needles through there. Careful not to like poke through or anything. You just want to grab them with the other hand, and it's a little awkward, but yep, just like that. You'll pull them through and you can see how they'll essentially join kind of, and turn it inside out. And you'll want to separate again so it's the same 5 and 5, because they probably joined, like kind of cinched back together on this other side when you turned it inside out. So separate those just like that. And you'll want to work your 3-needle bind off with one of those strands as well. So you'll pull those through. You can snip the end, leaving kind of a long tail, because you want to weave it in, and then you also have to work the 3-needle bind off with one of the strands. Doesn't really matter what strand you use, but I generally use the darker of the two. You can use whichever you want though. Don't use both of them though, because it does make it a little bit more bulky then. So I'm going to cut the strands just so it's a little bit easier to work with, because I kind of have a lot of yarn going on otherwise. Like I said, a lot of readjustment, but just trust the process here because it's worth it. It's the finishing touch. So pull those through. Now that they're cut, I can pull them through a little easier. You pull both of them through, not just the one that you're using for the 3-needle bind off. And a 3-needle bind off is pretty easy. I'll show you how to do it as well if you've never worked one. But essentially we're going to use another needle. So I'm using our short circular needle to work the 3-needle bind off. You could honestly use the size 8 needle that we use for the cast on edge as well for the 3-needle bind off, because you do want to work it loosely. Like I pointed out at the beginning, I worked this 3-needle bind off a little bit too tight, whereas on the other sample that I made, I worked it looser, and I like the looser 3-needle bind off because it looks like it more just seamlessly joins at the top and there's no puckering. I don't mind the puckering and I wouldn't worry about it, but I do just like the look of a looser 3-needle bind off better. So you can use the size 8 needle if you're worried about making your 3-needle bind off loose. So push those strands to kind of near the end of both of those needles, and then take your 3rd needle. So 3-needle bind off because you're holding 3 needles. It's a little bit finicky, but you're only doing it for 5 stitches, so it's not a big deal. So you're going to go through that front stitch as though you were going to knit, and then you have to go through the back stitch, whereas normally you would just knit right then. You also go through the back stitch as if to knit. So it's kind of weird, but you now pull through, you wrap it around and pull it through as if to knit. So you've essentially knit those 2 stitches together off of 2 different needles. So drop those markers, and you have to make sure you get the stitch and the yarn over on this one. Go through both of them as if to knit the front, and then the back as if to knit. Wrap your yarn around, pull it through the back stitches and through the front stitches. Again, make sure you get both of them, both of the strands. So before you move on to the next one, you actually have to work your bind off. So you're going to pull past that first bind off stitch over the second bind off stitch. So you just have 1 on that right needle again. So now work your next knit 2 together from the 2 needles type of stitch, and take those off, and then pass that first one over the second one. Now you work the next stitch and make sure you get the yarn over with it again. It's really important because you have to hold that yarn over. Otherwise it's kind of like a dropped stitch, so just be careful there. And then pass that over again. And then you get rid of your stitch markers. Again, just drop those stitch markers and work the next 2. Like I said, definitely work this looser than I'm doing. I'm doing it too tight. It's sometimes hard when you're filming. But just work that final stitch and then pass the first one over the second one again. And now you'll pull that all the way through. Your final loop, you'll just pull through. And you will have to weave in these stitches, but you can kind of see, you can see there how I did it too tight. It's already kind of puckering on this edge. I kind of stretch it out a little bit, but that's okay. And then you will weave in those 2 stitches. So I'll show you on the right side. You can see they just join together up at the center top. Yeah, it doesn't look like totally just straight, like I said, because it's kind of tight, but that's okay. I think it still looks really good. And if you do it looser, your 3-needle bind off looser, it will look more like the pink sample. Just stay relaxed, or do it with the size 8 needle. But as you can see, it still looks really nice. I love the look of the decreases and the way this hat is shaped. It's just so perfect. So to finish your final finishing touches, you will have to weave in all the edges. And then remember how I told you you can adjust those your decreased stitches while you block it. So what you want to do is soak it in lukewarm water with some wool wash if you have, and then take it out, dry it. Don't wring it dry, just step on it with towels or whatever, get out some of the water, and then while it's wet, you'll adjust these stitches just like I'm showing you here to kind of make them more even. If one's looking a little big, just take some yarn, the stitch next to it, then just like take some of that yarn and put it to the stitch next to it, and it'll all even out just like this. And it does pretty quickly help a lot. I love the look of just like even decreases. I feel like it's really a finishing touch. So you'll do that to all the stitches while it's wet. Not right now, it's dry, but while it's wet. If you've never blocked anything before, you will maybe want to watch a blocking tutorial, but basically you just soak it wet, soak it until it's wet, and let it dry either flat or on a balloon. I normally dry my hats on a balloon, but you want to do a balloon that's significantly smaller than your finished hat will be so that it doesn't get overstretched. So I think I normally do like a 16-inch balloon, even though my finished hat size is like between 21 and 22 inches, so quite a bit smaller. You can also take some yarn to those purl stitches, just like that. Kind of pull the white strand that's between it, and then you'll weave in the strands from your cast on edge as well, but you can see how the hat finishes and how it's formed. It's really nice and stretchy, so lovely, and I love the look of the two colors. So here it is, all blocked. You can see that it just looks a little more relaxed. The decreases look better, and here's the pink sample as well. I love this hat, and I hope that you do as well. I also hope that you've enjoyed this tutorial. Please be sure to comment below if you have any questions or comments, and also definitely subscribe to my channel if you want to stay up to date with new projects and tutorials that I post. Be sure to tag me on Instagram at originally.lovely if you want me to see your finished work. Thanks so much and happy knitting. Enjoy.